Every gambler knows that the secret to surviving,
I don't wanna take advice from fools.
you always won every time you placed a bet.
Money, that's what I want.
I'm Joe Duffy, CEO of OffshoreInsiders.com. I know it's actually been a while since we've done a video and a combination podcast or simulcast. We've been doing some previews in combination with SBR Forum Sportsbook Review, but here we are back to preview the 2013 National Championship game in college football, the University of Alabama and Notre Dame. Now, this game actually opened up in Las Vegas at about 8 to 8.5 and opened up offshore at 10 to 10.5. The big difference in that is the quote-unquote intangibles. On paper, Vegas was right. But when you add the quote-unquote intangibles, that's why the line was a little bit higher offshore. The biggest difference is the obvious difference. Alabama has been there, done that. They've got the national championships under their belt. They also played in the big SEC championship game. While Notre Dame has a freshman quarterback, they put up fantastic statistics this year, and you can make a strong argument that Notre Dame has a good chance to win this outright. But the public especially loves the fact that Alabama is obviously an SEC team. We do too. And the fact that Alabama's been here and done that. Now, take into consideration the University of Georgia. We had a wise guy play on the University of Georgia in the SEC championship game. They covered, and they almost won the game outright. But one of the things that Georgia had going their way is they had played in the SEC championship game the year before, so they knew what it was like. This is uncharted water for the Fighting Irish, and that could be the biggest difference, because if it weren't for the mental part of the game, Notre Dame would jump out as the play, getting all those points. Now, excluding, of course, the All-SEC final last year, which Alabama defeated LSU, the SEC team has won 4 of 5 of the national championship games by double digits, and actually even including last year, that would make it 5 out of 6. The one exception to the rule was when Auburn won the national championship, and they were as close to being a one-man team as you'll ever see win the national championship, where that is not the case for Alabama. Now, some interesting factoids. In Nick Saban's 3 BCS championship games, his defenses have forced 9 turnovers and scored twice. Of course, last year, as you know, Alabama held LSU to only 5 first downs. Notre Dame held 5 teams to over 20 points per game, less than their normal average. But, of course, the Irish faced only 3 offenses that were ranked in the top 57 all year. Now, those of you who are longtime clients of mine, as most professional gamblers are, you know that we draw a distinction between rankings and ratings, but rankings are still a pretty good guideline, even though the ratings are a little more complicated, and they are definitely more important. Now, Notre Dame has allowed only 10 touchdowns, 9 by the defense in this season, which is the fewest in a single season since 2000. And in 3 games against top 10 teams, Alabama has a -6 turnover margin. So that's interesting. Alabama has actually played their worst against the best teams, and they have a negative turnover margin. All the other games, they have a +19 turnover margin. Now, keep in mind that Alabama has actually struggled their most against up-tempo teams. ESPN Insider, which we've mentioned quite a few times, is one of the favorite sources that we use at OffshoreInsiders.com. They did an interesting breakdown before the SEC championship game that showed that Alabama in the previous several years has struggled the most against pretty high-powered and up-tempo offenses. Notre Dame is not in that category, but obviously most of the teams they've struggled against, including Texas A&M, the game they lost, were against very high-quality teams. So is there a certain Peter principle that Alabama has this year? If so, that would favor the Fighting Irish of Notre Dame. Now, the Irish and this is kind of an interesting fact, because in many respects you would say that Notre Dame has overachieved this year. So is the long layoff going to hurt them? Is it going to help them? This is a statistic that I will admit surprised us, but that's why we got to go with the facts rather than our preconceived conclusions. The Irish are the 6th team that reached the BCS championship game after losing at least 4 games outright the previous year. The previous 5 teams have all won the BCS championship game. Now, as you know, Alabama did lose to Texas A&M, and also bad clock management by the University of Georgia put Alabama in this game. So it's not like the Crimson Tide. This is not one of the most dominant teams that they have sent to the championship game in the past few years. Obviously quite a good team, but is it the best team that Nick Saban's ever had? You can make a strong argument they did not. They also struggled to LSU this year, and LSU not as good as they were last year. Meanwhile, the Irish, their toughest game this year, they did win. They won 30-13 at Oklahoma. So the Irish have shown in their step-up games this year, they've actually played the best against the best. All in all, we're still going over some notes, some key indicators, quite frankly. I'm about 65% sure who I'm going to go with on this side, and about 60% sure that we will have a totals play and what it's going to be, but we go over all the key metrics before we make our final selection at offshoreinsiders.com. Again, I'm Joe Duffy, CEO of offshoreinsiders.com and anchor of God's Tips, which is the #1 winningest sports service in the entire world. But join us at offshoreinsiders.com.